Confession before we start. I read this book at 1 in the morning, fully expecting a conversion experience. The internet's favorite romance author, a title everyone swears wrecked them, a spicy little paperback with a broken heart on the cover. I wanted to get it. I wanted to be the person crying into a pillow at 2 a.m., posting a blurry selfie with the caption "not okay." Instead, I finished it, closed my laptop, and said out loud to an empty room, "That's it?" And then I went and checked if I was the problem, which, spoiler, is basically this entire video. So today we're doing Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover, and I'm going to tell you up front, this is not a glowing review. I picked this one specifically because it's one of the most recommended entry points into her catalogue, the book people hand you when they want to convert you into a coho reader. Not It Ends With Us, not Verity, this one, the starter pack romance. Part of why I picked it is the sheer scale of the phenomenon around it. This is an author whose backlist got resurrected almost entirely by short vertical videos of people sobbing into a camera, and Ugly Love rides that same wave, an older title that found a second life once an algorithm decided heartbreak content performs well. That alone made me curious whether the book holds up outside of a 15-second clip of someone crying about it. I went in with actual, calibrated expectations. Not literary fiction expectations, romance novel expectations, the kind where you just want a good hook, some tension, maybe one devastating gut punch by the end. That's a low bar. I've cleared that bar with books that had objectively worse covers than this one. This book still limboed under it. Here's the setup, paraphrased, no page-by-page transcript, just the shape of it. Tate is 23, about to start nursing school, and she moves into her brother's spare apartment for a few weeks while she gets settled in a new city. The catch is that her brother's roommate is a pilot named Miles, brooding, gorgeous, allergic to eye contact. The kind of guy fiction insists is irresistible, specifically because he's rude to you. Miles flies in at odd hours, says almost nothing, radiates the kind of mystery that in real life would just mean bad roommate, and in a romance novel means main character. Tate's brother, who exists mostly to disappear from every scene the second the plot needs privacy, is conveniently absent a lot. Within about a day of meeting, Tate and Miles agree to a purely physical arrangement. No dating, no feelings, no questions about each other's pasts. Miles even gives her an actual spoken list of rules, delivered like it's a business merger, not a hookup. And that's thread number 1 I want you to clock right now, because we are going to come back to this rule book a lot. The rules exist, so the book can spend 200 pages breaking them one at a time while pretending that's romantic instead of, the literal premise falling apart in real time. Every single rule gets violated within a chapter of being stated. Miles says, "No spending the night," then spends the night. Miles says, "Don't ask about my past," then broods about his past in front of her constantly, out loud, unprompted. The rules aren't a structure, they're a countdown timer, and the show is watching how fast it hits 0. Meanwhile, we get alternating chapters from Miles, years earlier, as a teenager falling for a girl named Rachel. This is the dual timeline the whole book hangs its emotional weight on, and structurally it's actually the smartest choice in the book. Present-day Miles is cold and unreadable, so past Miles is where you're supposed to fall for him instead. Before whatever happened to Rachel turned him into a block of ice with a pilot's license. And look, I'll give it this much, credit where due, the teenage Miles chapters are written with more warmth than anything happening in the present-day plot. He's goofy around Rachel, he's easy to like, the dialogue actually sounds like 2 18-year-olds instead of 2 adults workshopping a hostage negotiation. It's a shame that warmth doesn't survive the timeline jump into the present. Back in the present, the physical relationship escalates, obviously, that's the promise on the cover. And this is where thread number 2 shows up. The dialogue during every single intimate scene reaches for a metaphor so overworked it loops back around to funny. Comparisons to fireworks, gravity, electricity, occasionally entire weather systems moving through a room. I started keeping a mental tally around chapter 6. I stopped being able to take any of it seriously somewhere around the 4th thunderstorm metaphor. It's not that romance needs to be subtle. Plenty of great romance writing is over the top on purpose, and it works because the prose has control over the excess. This doesn't feel controlled. It feels like a first draft nobody trimmed. The same 3 or 4 images recycled every single time two characters so much as hold hands. The plot in the middle stretch is thin, and I mean genuinely thin. Tate gets jealous over a woman from Miles's past. Miles shuts down. They fight about the rules, they break a rule. They have a tender moment. They reset back to cold distance. Repeat that cycle roughly 4 times with cosmetic variation, different bar, different apartment, same argument wearing a new shirt, and that's the entire middle third of the book. Nothing new is actually being revealed about either character during this stretch. We're just watching the rulebook thread get yanked taut and released over and over, dressed up as tension. A jealousy subplot involving a woman from Miles's past gets introduced and resolved so quickly it barely counts as a subplot. More like a speed bump the book needed to hit a word count. There's a party scene in here that exists almost entirely to manufacture that jealousy beat. Miles's friends milling around in the background, doing nothing memorable, functioning as furniture until the plot needs a witness to a fight. None of them get a personality beyond friend who is present. It's a common shortcut in this kind of book, side characters as scenery, and it's forgivable in small doses, except this book leans on it constantly whenever it needs a scene to feel populated. The confrontation itself plays out exactly like you'd guess. Clipped dialogue, a misunderstanding that could be solved by one honest sentence neither character says, because the plot needs another chapter out of the standoff. It resolves off-page almost as quickly as it started, and by the next chapter it's like it never happened, which is sort of the pattern for every present-day conflict in this book. The teenage timeline, though, keeps escalating in the background, and it becomes clear early that Rachel's story is not heading somewhere good. Miles gets her pregnant in his last year of high school, they decide, very young, very sure of themselves, to keep the baby and build a life together. The book is very obviously building toward tragedy, the kind where you can see the shape of the ending 100 pages out and you're just waiting for the plot to catch up to you. There's a whole stretch of the teenage timeline dedicated to them setting up a life together, an apartment, a routine, the kind of domestic montage that's supposed to make you invested before it gets ripped away. It mostly works, honestly, better than anything in the present-day plot, because for once the book lets two people just like each other without a rulebook standing between them. When it finally lands the reveal, a car accident, a hospital, an emergency delivery, and a loss that reframes every cold thing present-day Miles has done, it is, credit where due, a genuinely upsetting sequence. If you told me that scene existed in isolation, cut out of the rest of the book, I'd say it's effective. It's the one place the prose stops reaching for cute metaphors and just sits in something awful for a few pages. The problem is that one strong chapter has to retroactively justify 200 pages of a guy being cryptic and rude to a woman who kept forgiving him for reasons the book never really earns in real time. Tragic backstory is not the same as character development, and Ugly Love uses the backstory as a substitute for actually building Miles into someone whose walls coming down feels like a process instead of a switch flipping on cue. Once the reveal lands, Tate finds out the truth roughly the way you'd expect, second-hand, at the worst possible moment, and there's a betrayal beat where she's furious he never told her any of it. Which fair, except the book never really interrogates why he was traumatized, should excuse months of treating her like an inconvenience with benefits. There's a stretch right after where Tate pulls back, understandably, and Miles has to actually chase the relationship instead of coasting on mystery, which is genuinely the closest the present-day plot gets to him doing work rather than just having a sad backstory. It doesn't last long as a dynamic, a chapter or two at most, before the book decides it's ready to wrap things up. It just resolves the fight with an airport-adjacent reconciliation and calls the rulebook officially retired. Let's talk running thread number 1's payoff, because the rulebook does eventually get textually thrown out. Miles says some version of the rules don't matter anymore, and the book treats this like growth. I'd argue it's not growth, it's just the plot running out of road. The rules were never a real obstacle, they were a device to manufacture tension out of two people who liked each other from page 1 and had no actual reason to hide it beyond, then there's no book. And thread number 2, the metaphor problem, it doesn't get better in the back half either. Even in the middle of the emotional gut-punch chapters, the prose still reaches for the same overworked comparisons. It undercuts scenes that should hit hard, because you've been trained for 200 pages to expect a purple metaphor is coming, so part of your brain half braces for the joke instead of actually feeling the moment land. Now here's where I want to zoom out, because my opinion is one opinion, and I went and actually looked at how this book sits with readers broadly, not just people who already agree with me. The reception is genuinely split in an interesting way, not just some people liked it, some didn't. There's an actual fault line underneath that split. The defense camp, and it's a large camp, this book has sold an enormous number of copies for a reason, consistently points to that reveal chapter as worth the price of admission on its own. For a lot of readers, the dual timeline tragedy lands hard enough that the slower, repetitive present-day stuff reads as a fair trade. They're not reading for prose quality, they're reading for the gut punch. And by their own metric, the book delivers exactly what it promises to deliver. The criticism camp, and this is where I land, pushes back on exactly the thing the defenders wave away. That the emotional payoff shouldn't have to carry the entire rest of the book on its back. If you strip out the twist, what's left is a thin will they won't they with dialogue that reads like a rough draft, and character motivation that leans on a trauma reveal instead of earning the relationship in real time, scene by scene. There's also a specific fault line around how the book frames Miles's coldness. A chunk of readers find the emotional distance romantic, the classic guarded guy gets thawed arc, a comfort read they return to. Another chunk finds it a pretty explicit example of romance fiction rewarding a woman for tolerating someone's bare minimum communication because he's hot and sad and flies planes. I land pretty firmly in the second group. Being traumatized explains behavior. It doesn't automatically make that behavior a good template for a relationship, and the book never really draws that line for you. It just resolves the tension, hands you the reconciliation, and moves on to the acknowledgements page. That distinction, explains versus excuses, is basically the whole disagreement in one sentence. I've also seen a decent amount of pushback on the insta-love angle specifically. The idea that two people can go from strangers to rearranging their entire emotional lives around each other in a matter of weeks, with almost no ordinary getting-to-know-you scenes in between. Defenders will say that's just genre shorthand. Romance compresses time because nobody wants 300 pages of two people slowly becoming friends first. Fair, except compression only works if what's happening in the compressed space feels specific to these two people. And a lot of Ugly Love's middle stretch would read identically with the names swapped for any other pair of stock romance leads. It's also worth comparing this to where Hoover's writing goes next. Because Ugly Love reads like a rough draft of ideas she executes with more control later. A dual timeline used for real dramatic irony. A cold love interest whose defenses get dismantled with actual pacing instead of a plot deadline. Whether those later books stick, the landing is a conversation for another video, but the seams are more visible here, and I think that's part of why this one splits people so cleanly. So where does that leave me? I think Ugly Love is a technically competent delivery system for one very effective gut punch chapter, wrapped in 200 pages of repetitive, overwritten filler that only really works if you're already primed to forgive it going in. I don't think that's a personal failing of anyone who loved this book. Plenty of readers get exactly what they came for, and that's a legitimate thing to want from a novel. I just don't think the ending hits hard is the same thing as this is a good book. And I'm not going to pretend those are the same standard just because the marketing wants them to be. A gut punch you didn't earn is still a gut punch, but it's not the same achievement as one the whole book was quietly building toward from page 1. Verdict time, I'm putting this at a 2 out of 5, maybe a 2.5 if I'm feeling generous about that one strong chapter and the teenage timeline chapters that surround it. The dual timeline structure is a smart idea executed with more patience than the present-day plot deserves. And if you want a quick, emotionally manipulative read where you already know what you're signing up for, it will do that job efficiently, and you'll be done in an afternoon. For reference, if you've read It Ends With Us and thought the present-day relationship dragged, but the underlying issue it was tackling justified sticking around, you'll recognize the same shape here, minus the heavier subject matter and arguably minus the same sense of stakes. This one is lower commitment, lower payoff, a lighter version of the same trick. If you're coming in wanting sharp dialogue, character growth you actually watch happen instead of one that gets explained to you in a flashback, or prose that doesn't lean on the same 5 metaphors for 300 pages, skip it. Or at minimum, walk in with your expectations recalibrated at the door, the way mine eventually were. If you've read this and you think I'm being unfair to it, genuinely, tell me in the comments, specifically, do you think that final reveal actually earns everything that happens before it? Or are you giving it credit the first 200 pages didn't build on their own? I want the actual disagreement, not just "you're wrong, tell me why, cite the chapter." And if you're new here, this channel is basically me reading things so you don't have to guess whether they're worth your time, so subscribe if that's useful, hit like if you want more of these breakdowns, and I'll see you in the next one.